If you look at the interaction between a regulator and the firms that it regulates, do you sometimes feel it's almost like a game being played? Well, in a way, you're right, because one of the 5 core approaches to supervision is all about how to play this game, and more particularly, how to play it in such a way that you can make firms comply with the law out of their own free will. My name is Oud Kaster, and this is Supervision Strategy. Last week I discussed the various types of motivation that companies may have to comply with regulations. This week I kind of build on that because I'll be discussing responsive regulation, and I'll be showing you hopefully that leveraging compliance motivations is in fact at the heart of that particular supervision strategy. Responsive regulation is in fact the most dominant approach to supervision in research. And in practice, also in some domains, such as, for instance, environmental regulation, it's quite a dominant approach. Now, there's of course a lot to be said about this strategy, but for now, I'll just focus on highlighting a few of the insights and assumptions that are crucial in this particular strategy, and I'll point out some practical consequences as well. So in the previous blog post, I argued that there are 5 core approaches to supervision. Responsive regulation is one of these 5. Now, I would argue that there are distinct perspectives on supervision that underlie these 5 core approaches. So there's a legal perspective on supervision, there's a market perspective, a motivational perspective, a risk management, and a pragmatic perspective. So the dominant viewpoint in responsive regulation or supervision is the motivational one, or if you like, the psychological perspective. So the primary question in this approach is how to best motivate companies and the people working in those companies to comply with law and regulations. So the starting point in this approach is the fairly straightforward observation that regulators can be a lot more effective if they can make sure that companies voluntarily follow the rules instead of having to force each and every individual firm to comply by heavy-handed supervision and enforcement. This is also a lot more efficient because in this way you can focus your always limited enforcement capacity on the few firms that really do not want to comply unless you make them, so the bad apples. The second, again fairly straightforward observation is that firms watch what regulators do and they react strategically to what they see them doing. And this interaction impacts to what degree they voluntarily comply with regulations. So in a responsive regulation approach, regulators leverage this interaction to promote voluntary compliance. And they do this by explicit strategic communication with regulated firms. So by the way, the theoretical foundation for this idea lies in game theory, which in itself is extremely interesting, but that's for another blog post. So the core of this strategy is the so-called escalation pyramid. So the regulator will start at the bottom of that pyramid. So typically you will start off by saying to a regulated firm, we're going to assume that you'll want to comply with the law. And if needed, we'll help you to do that. Now if it turns out that the company falls short of that expectation, then the regulator will gradually escalate to more heavy-handed forms of supervision and enforcement. But if then the firm actually improves its attitude and its regulatory performance, then the regulator will reward that improvement by de-escalating towards the bottom of the pyramid. So in doing so, the regulator will strategically appeal to the various compliance motivations that I explained in my previous blog post. So he will first emphasize social professional norms, offer help, but if need be, he will escalate to threatening and indeed realizing enforcement action if that's what's needed. So this approach has been implemented in various domains, in various regions all over the world, and it can be a very efficient, effective and sophisticated method. So arguably the weakest point of this strategy is that everyday supervision practice tends to be fuzzy, not all that clear-cut. So both research and practical experience seem to indicate that firms may not be able to consistently read all these escalation and de-escalation signals that the regulator gives off, at least not well enough to strategically respond in the way that's anticipated by the regulator. However, the underlying train of thought remains extremely valid in any supervision approach, which is to strategically leverage compliance motivations so you can focus your threats and your enforcement actions where they are needed most. So what are your thoughts on responsive regulation? Let us all know in the comment section or let me know at supervisionstrategy.com. So next time I'll reflect on professional judgment. So what role, if any, should there be for intuition and subjective experience of a supervision officer in supervision practice and enforcement? Until then, thank you for watching and thank you for working on supervision.